Let me call to order the meeting of the Civilian Appeal Board, August 20, 2025. Let's start with a roll call.
Russell Olmsted.
Here.
Jason Osborne.
Here.
Dean Pacific.
Here.
Michelle Williams.
Present.
Sophia Brewer, absent. Jordan Cross.
Here.
Reginald Howard. And Doug Maliski, both are out.
All right, and just for the record, I believe we have a sufficient membership to constitute a quorum today. Is that correct? Okay. Moving on to next item of business, approval of the, April 16, 2025 minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? All right. Is there any discussion before we take a motion on the minutes?
It's a couple date corrections.
Okay.
Minutes are listed for April 16, 2024. So we just need to make that correction throughout.
Oh, yes, 25, got it. Okay, any other corrections? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
And
Support.
I jumped the gun there. Specifically, do I hear a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Support.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll take it to an oral vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion passes. All right, next item of business is the board liaison report.
All right, well, happy August to everyone. Good to see you. Just a couple things, very short report today. First thing is that we do have a pending appeal. That appeal, once we are able to work through membership and get those things worked out, hopefully we'll be hearing that appeal at the following meeting. I'm hoping that can be at the next meeting. So be on the lookout for all the information that would come related to that. I believe the law department already has the videos and information that has to be watched and seen here at City Hall available. You can schedule with our amazing attorney to take care of that. Outside of that, we will be sending the materials to you so that we can move forward with that. The next thing is the reappointments. So as you all know, currently everyone serving on CAB is a holdover. And we are attempting to rectify that by getting all of the paperwork in. So if you have not submitted your PIF, your applications to serve on the board again, and you desire to serve on the board again, please get that submitted to the clerk's office yesterday so that we can get everything through to the committee of appointments. I know that some have already gone through to the committee on appointments. I think others will be going through at this next city commission meeting. All those things being said, if you haven't, please get those in. If you don't intend to serve again, thank you for your service. Please let me know so that we can, just so we have some awareness and we can share that information as commissioners consider what they're doing with the rest of their appointments. The last thing is, I'm excited to welcome the newest member of OPA staff today. Ms. Letitia Lipscomb has joined OPA's office as our Civilian Violence Prevention and Intervention Manager. So as you all know, OPA has several boxes in which we work, and one of those is violence prevention, and that's something that wasn't originally part of our portfolio, but it has been for the last several years, and it's grown to the point where we need staff to navigate that space. And I'm so excited to have Letitia joining our team. This is her third day here at the city. Many of you probably know her from community and the excellent work that she's been doing for several years in community, but she'll be leading that body of work, and I'm sure you'll interact with her in that capacity now. With that concludes my report.
All right. Moving on to an item that's been on the agenda for a while now, the proposed bylaw amendment. I'll start off by saying that the subcommittee has met on this a number of times. We had some discussion at our last meeting. We have discussed it. The subcommittee has discussed it since then, proposed some edits which were disseminated to the board members earlier this week. And I sincerely hope that was enough time for everyone to review it and bring their thoughts here today to discuss. My intention is that if there's any proposed amendments. I'd like to discuss them openly at this point and see if we can't come up with firm language today. But if it ends up being too complicated, obviously we can send it back to the subcommittee and go from there. So let me open discussion on the proposed bylaw change.
With the new language that was added, I'm wondering about the distinction that seems to be being made between additional and remedial and new board members. I would propose some simplifications, and I did because Robert made some copies for us. I just did some quick editing, and I'll just pass and we can share if that's okay. And just because I'm wondering if we can simplify this just a little bit to get to our point, since it's the training piece that's the most important to us all. And then also the last sentence there, decisions pertaining to training shall be made in collaboration with the board. But if the board is the one that's going to vote and be the decision maker, I believe the language should be recommendations. So just trying to simplify it a little bit, because I don't quite understand the delineation between the different groups, because we can just talk about training, if that works.
Frankly, it's probably a product of just looking at the same language over and over again and just,
Yeah,
you know,
that's what I wondered.
needing fresh eyes. And so I sincerely appreciate your effort in looking at this and simplifying things as needed. And if, I need just a few minutes to read it over. If anyone else has any comments, please jump in.
Can you all read the language out loud?
Absolutely. Sure. So no changes to the first paragraph, and then the second one would be, new and existing members shall receive training as deemed necessary by a majority vote of the board. Recommendations pertaining to training shall be made in collaboration with the board liaison or functional equivalent. Just trying to pull out some redundancy to make it a little clearer.
I guess the first thing that occurs to me is there any conflict then between, first of all, let me say, I think the simplification here, 95% of it is exactly what was needed. I also like the change from decisions to recommendations. My one concern is a possible conflict between the first paragraph, which indicates areas of training and spells them out, that training shall be had. But then the second paragraph seems to suggest under the revised language that the training is discretionary, like all training is discretionary, not just, I think that was probably the purpose of additional remedial phrase in that second paragraph. Does that make sense?
Okay, then. I guess that wasn't clear because it's the inclusion of then both. So is it new and existing members or existing members? I guess we'll start there. Is that, who is the subject of that sentence? New and existing.
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
in terms of the training, is it training that's in addition to what's required in paragraph 1? Is that the intent?
Could you repeat that?
Is the training that's referenced in paragraph 2 intended to be in addition to the first paragraph?
Yes, it's intended to be in addition to anything that may need to, additional trainings that may be needed or desired by the board members. And I think the intent there from our perspective was labor laws change, use of force trainings practices, all of these things change. And we wanted to allow some flexibility to the board to say, okay, everything in paragraph 1 is everything we need to be trained on to meet everything that is spelled out within the guidelines of 800-02. And, but as things change, we want to have flexibility to be able to have remedial trainings or additional trainings to those ones that are required and spelled out in paragraph 1.
So I think you could do, new and existing members shall receive additional training as deemed necessary, or you could do something like, new and existing members shall receive training beyond what is referenced in paragraph 1 as deemed necessary. I think you could go either way and accomplish that.
So what your one proposal was to return the word additional and keep or remedial stricken. Is that right? So the
I would suggest that remedial sounds as if the board was somehow deficient. And I think changes in laws and other things where we would want additional information. I don't know, just the negative connotation of remedial seems to me to not quite be the intent of what we're doing. I mean, if somebody is deficient in their duty, then that's going to be a whole different kind of conversation versus what I think we're trying to do right here, which is ensure that we have the ability to get training that we deem necessary.
I take your point about perhaps the colloquial connotation. I think the word is valid by its formal definition, and I guess my thought of using the word remedial in that instance was if, supposing we're taxing our legal counsel quite a bit with questions and pushing things beyond, what would be allowed under the union contract or under the statutes, the city code, or if this board, hypothetically were to come to some conclusion that was beyond the boundaries of law, that would then, I think, this would empower the board to self-correct through requiring remedial training, in that they'd have to go back and do perhaps the city policies, use of force training again as a refresher. I mean, members can be on this board for up to 6 years. If we're just mandating that initial course of training, things can get forgotten, things can get missed, overlooked, not thought about for a period of time. So that was my thought with using remedial. Again,
And by a vote of the board, you can make that happen.
Sure, we can do that now, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, I'll say, like, broadly speaking, I don't know if this bylaw really creates powers that don't already exist. But I do think it codifies kind of that duty to do so, right? It works as a reminder to the board that this is an important factor and something you need to do to be able to do your jobs well, and pointing out, underlining the fact that this is something this board can do.
So one thought, if I may, related to the change that would be made to the final sentence in paragraph 2. That means changing the language from from decisions to recommendations. I do have some concern regarding that, and that is because the nature of the way that trainings are presented, whereas the board can vote to do training, there are still necessary trainings that need to happen, whether the board wants to do it or not, right? And with this board, obviously, I feel very comfortable that, those things would happen.
Right.
But we don't make rules for the people sitting in front of us today. We make rules for the future. So I think changing it to where staff is simply recommending what trainings look like as opposed to a part of that decision process is concerning to me. And I could see why that could cause some consternation for other parties involved. Police department or people, other people that may be interested parties in this space. So I recommend leaving the language at decisions for that reason.
Does that, but what you're suggesting, is that unaccomplished by the first paragraph where it says the board members shall receive training in the specific areas that are required?
Not exactly for the same reasons of what you were just describing, for the necessity of remedial training or any of those other things that may come up, right? I think the same gap that you're seeking to fill by having space where it says, hey, if we need remedial training, then we can do it. It's the same gap that I'm concerned about.
Right.
So
The ambiguity.
I guess the way that this reads to me is that when we what is deemed necessary is done by the majority vote of the board. So if that's the way that things are decided, then perhaps what you're referring to, Brandon, needs to be up in that paragraph as opposed to or up in that sentence as opposed to the sentence. To me, they conflict, and that's what I'm trying to figure out how to judge.
I understand that.
Can you help me, not see
Sure.
the conflict? If
No,
you're not seeing
I
one?
think the conflict that you see is there. I think
Okay.
the last time we discussed this, I raised a similar issue. And quite honestly, I just wasn't looking to bring up a point I raised previously, and the board has clearly, made a position regarding. I struggle with the language being that the board is voting on what the training is and making a decision altogether. Because there needs to be collaboration in reaching decisions on what training is. The board most certainly can say training that they believe they need, and I think staff should do that. But there's also a staff position here in the interest of protecting the labor rights of, the interested parties, of making sure that the board is trained well. So I saw the decision language as like almost like it wasn't the language that I requested the last time, but it still reflected the fact that there was some need for that collaboration, and that's why I was more comfortable with it.
May I? From an intent standpoint, the final sentence in that second paragraph, the intent of that wasn't to be in conflict with the first section. The intent was through collaboration with OPA and City Attorney's Office. There's a decision about what remedial, through collaboration with that, there's a decision between what to bring before the board to vote on and discuss. And then the board votes on what that is. If there's a different way of phrasing it, I do think, I worry about changing it from what Brandon just brought up. I worry about changing it to recommendation because of it creating some sort of ambiguity there that doesn't create a formal requirement. And if it's not a formal requirement, if a decision passes into arbitration, that can be used as some sort of way to overturn what the board has been seeing. And a lot of what I view this on is through what happens if a decision from the board goes through to arbitration. How do we make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that we are legally organizing our trainings and practices and policies in a way that protects the decisions that the board makes. So I worry about that ambiguity if we do have the recommendation there.
And I completely understand, and Brandon, I'm really glad that you raised that point again, because that I have a lot of my notes on that, but the way that you're reading that reminds me of our conversation back in April, and I fully agree with you. And Russell too, for similar reasons. I was looking at more of the juxt of the two sentences together. So if that is our view as a board, which I firmly support, I would recommend that first sentence then be, new and existing members shall receive additional training as deemed necessary by a majority vote of the board or as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent.
Russell, can you remind me, what's the city code where that mandates this training? I think you mentioned it earlier.
Well, it's in coordination with the actual 800-02, which is the piece that actually was passed in the 90s that established the Civilian Appeals Board.
All right, but that code ordinance lists these areas, if I recall, right?
That's under the purview. Yes, it lists basically what that.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yes, the 800-02 lists what type of cases are heard by the Civilian Appeals Board. And so what we have in paragraph 1 kind of goes along with what types of cases, what training would be needed, formal training would be needed in order to have board members properly educated in order to hear cases regarding those types of issues.
Okay, well, my understanding, though, there is authority outside of the board's bylaws as far as training. That's why we included these specific areas. Am I missing this, or am I mistaking something here? perhaps our,
I'm not, yeah, I think we
can
keep
help
the
us out
first paragraph. I mean,
well, I know, I'm getting to a greater point of, this board can't legislate itself out of external requirements, such as through the city code, right? And so, my thoughts on the second paragraph were in the instance of if the board self-polices and finds a deficiency in existing training, or if the board finds other areas of training which I think could be valuable. One of the things that were discussed in the subcommittee was, a potential community leader that has information about at-risk members of our community. It's a training that's not mandated, it's not part of our current curriculum, but may prove useful to this board in making its decisions. If that's something that the board believes is useful, I think that the board has the authority, inherent authority, to require that training, and this bylaw would not create the power, but it would reinforce the idea that it has that power. The board cannot abrogate training that's required by city ordinance or external forces through the OPA, to my understanding. So that's my thoughts on that. I say all this, I think we're actually very close on this language. I agree that the first paragraph, I think it sounds like the first paragraph is pretty well set. The second paragraph, I'm a little reticent to say that the OPA or the functional equivalent has the unilateral power to mandate additional training, because I think that does create additional power that doesn't already exist. I think the board is abrogating authority to an external source to mandate additional training. That's where I'm concerned about language that would create a mandate.
so then, I mean, it kind of has to be one of two ways. Either the second sentence is actually a recommendation and not a decision, and it's the majority vote that makes the determination, or OPA has the ability to determine trainings. Like, it's really got to go one way or the other. So that's where,
I think that the OPA has the authority to require a specific set of trainings which are described in the first paragraph.
so you believe that OPA should not have authority to determine if there are new trainings that the board needs to do.
I mean, if they already have that authority, they already have that authority. I don't think we can change that through a bylaw.
So I'm not aware of a city rule that speaks to what you're describing. So I'm not and I know it's semantics, but we've been talking about ordinances. I don't think there's an ordinance that applies to that.
Okay.
But a city commission policy,
Right.
I'm not aware of a city commission policy that speaks to exactly what you're describing. I do think I understand, though, the perspective that you're raising, which is this board wouldn't have the authority to give OPA the power to additional powers, essentially. And I think the language that Ms. Williams, proposed doesn't violate city rule, because it's not demanding that OPA do anything. It's not requiring OPA to take action. It's leaving space to say that OPA, this board recognizes that OPA, or it says the board liaison, or whoever is serving in that space, has the right to bring trainings forward to the board, which quite honestly I think is essential in order to ensure that this board's decisions can stand in different spaces. Again, let's go beyond the board we're talking about today, and imagine we have a board that is anti-police reform, right? Anti the way we talk about justice, anti-equity, all of those types of things that says we do not want equity training. Well, we look at that and we look at paragraph 1. It doesn't necessarily require that equity training be provided, and that would prevent staff from being able to do that if the board voted and said no, right? Would we have concerns about that? I think the answer is yes. My recommendations, the staff recommendation, would that be to adopt the language that was just proposed by Ms. Williams. I think it reaches the intent of what I'm hearing in the conversation, which is the board has the ability to say we need to have additional training or remedial training. And it also leaves space to say, staff can also say, we see a need for training, and we can bring that forward.
To your point, I worry. OPA has been fantastic in its leadership since being brought on as the liaison to this board. Prior to OPA's leadership on this, the leadership of the liaison to this board was not, in my opinion, was not as good. And some of the trainings that were required by that liaison put the board, in my opinion, in a position that jeopardized potential decisions if they were to reach to arbitration. And my worry in allowing that requirement without it being subjected to a vote of the board is that the board could not supersede a poor decision from a poor recommendation. And that to me could allow for trainings that would conflict with decisions that the board, potential decisions the board could make. It could jeopardize some of those decisions if the trainings were not done in the correct way. And I think that's why it's important to have it in a collaboration of what is brought to the board to decide. But then ultimately, we are here to be board members, which means that we are here to vote on these types of issues and to represent our community as community members on these types of issues. And I think that means ultimately it should be the board's decision on what is and is not additional trainings that are brought together. And that should be done through a collaborative process with city attorney's office and all of that. But what we have to remember as well, when all of us come onto this board, as members here, we have, luckily, like a majority of us here have experience in dealing with cases and experience in dealing with these trainings, but that may not always be the case. And if a whole bunch of board members come on here without knowing what trainings are necessary, without knowing, as it was when I first came on this board, without knowing what questions to ask, and just being told, these are the trainings that you have to have, and not being able to debate that and discuss it and vote on it, that worries me for creating too much of a power vacuum at some point.
And
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
I think I have the same concern that you have
Yes. Yeah.
from the opposite perspective.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the exact same concern.
That's
If
why
a-
we have the collaboration.
Which is why we have a collaboration. I agree. However, the decision the way this is worded is one-sided. So, again, the concern, and I'll make the point and let the board do what it does.
Yep.
But the concern that I have related to that when we look at it is if we get let's use a specific example. The police have a camera system that is relevant to a case that we're talking about, right? We got a new board who is anxious to hear the case, wants to navigate it. And the board liaison says, hey, we need to do additional training regarding this camera system in order for you to fully understand what's happening. And the board says, no, we don't want to do that. When we're talking about protecting a decision that is made by this board on a case, that's problematic, right? That would be significantly problematic. The way that, Russell, that you're describing it, as staff, we would not have the ability to say, no, you need to have this training before making this decision. The board will be able to make the decision. We will not take that training. And that is where the concern for me is. Again, practically, that's probably not going to be an issue that we're facing right now. I know it's not an issue we're facing right now, but we don't make rules for right now. We make them for the future. So, again, that's the nature of my concern. And I think I fully explained it, so I will yield.
I would only push back against that as the city, you have other repercussions. Like if you were trying to make a recommendation to the board and the board was absolute and adamant in saying no, the city commission could pass something that says the board has to have that training and it would be effective. So
Not at the
there are
time
other,
that I'm sorry.
Go
Not
ahead.
at the time that a decision is made on a case. So
Yeah, but
yes,
we would have that training prior to, though.
The
like all of this would
timing
have.
wouldn't work. You have a case in front of you. You're supposed to be making a decision as a board on the use of force within that case. And now we're going to wait for the commission to pass something regarding the training we needed. So I just want to take a step back. And for me, Russell, the arguments you were making are exactly why I want that in there, because I do believe it is necessary for a new board, an existing board, for us to have some balance. We don't know all of the dynamics. We have a partnership with OPA. OPA hasn't been in existence for all that long, and they've been amazing partners
Yes, they
in
have.
making sure that we have the relevant training and information necessary to make the decisions that we make. And so for me, just as the example Brandon was coming up with, you have a new board here. What's to say that they would not determine that they don't need additional training? I think this is a protective layer that adds protection for the board and its decisions, adds protection for our entire, well, I mean, really, it's for our community by allowing the board to pass things that are required for training, allowing OPA, everybody has a seat at the table. When we're talking about voting, OPA doesn't get a vote. And so while they can say what their opinion is or explain the rationale for particular training, there's no, it's a very one-sided collaboration between the board and OPA, because again, voting is power. OPA doesn't have that, right? So to me, shifting that to make it be a majority vote of the board, or as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent, allows someone who has a perspective that I can't possibly have to make sure that I'm aware of the information that I need in order to do my job. And so I will be voting for the inclusion of that.
So
Can you say that line one more time? We're talking about the last sentence of the second paragraph.
First sentence of the second paragraph.
All right, tell me what
So
you're
new and existing members shall receive, and I'm going to pause there. I think the additional and the remedial comes right into that bottom sentence, so we'll keep that. So, okay, I'm going to go back. Okay. New and existing members shall receive training as deemed necessary by a majority vote of the board, or as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent. Continuing, recommendations pertaining to additional or remedial training shall be made in collaboration with the board liaison or functional equivalent.
that would do away with the necessity of the first paragraph. Because you're saying in the first, that would have both sentences saying two different things. One saying that any training is done through vote of the board or through the board liaison, and then the second sentence is only pertaining to additional and remedial trainings.
I'm fine to keep additional in the first sentence if that helps get it through.
So strike the second sentence, keep the first one with the change you proposed.
Yeah, that would work.
Okay.
I mean, I like the statement of collaboration in the second sentence.
Yeah.
So I'm fine to keep that, and if including additional in the first phrasing ensures that there's distinction between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, that works for me.
So I share Mr. Olmsted's concern, which I think mirrors your concerns, just the other direction.
Yeah.
Because let me throw my own hypothetical out. Suppose this board decides it has been reached out to by a community member to offer training for at-risk people, or suppose the board determines that training in people with substance abuse or mental health disorders, it's applicable to the case before it, and it wants to participate in training. The sentence that you just laid out, I think, empowers the board liaison to overrule a desire by the board to participate in that training. And I have concerns about that. I think the board should be able to participate in that. I think it's giving away too much power to the liaison to nullify that.
How so, if it's an or?
So, well, this is what we're saying, is that we're saying, as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent. The board says they want to have this training, the liaison says, no, you can't have this training.
By a majority vote of the board can supersede that. So the board can choose, it says right here, the board can choose to have a training, or it can be identified by, I guess I'm confused on the use of or.
Let me phrase it in a non-negative term. So instead of the liaison saying you can't do a training, let's say the liaison says you have to participate in training, which, again, in a very different set of circumstances than we have now, where, say, OPA has taken a wildly different philosophical turn, or it ceases to exist, right? And their functional equivalent is saying this board needs to participate in, this is an extreme example, but it has to participate in nephrology training to understand criminality based on skull shape, right? Something, absurd or perhaps less absurd, but less warranted than the training we see now. I think that the amendment that you propose would empower that liaison or functional equivalent to require training, which is inherently biased or unhelpful to a decision by this board.
I'm going to be quiet and let somebody else speak.
I just have one question, just for intent. Do you see the addition of this, is the intent the additional language to say that the board can vote, or the liaison can decide one or the other, but not both, for a situation or a proposed?
So the other thing is, this is about shall receive. This is about adding training, not preventing training.
Yeah.
So it shall receive by this entity's decision or by this entity's decision. And I guess I'm just, I don't know. I don't know where we go.
If I, from what I'm hearing, the proposed language does not suggest in any circumstance the OPA would be able to prevent the board from having training that it was to vote to have. Now clearly, the board couldn't direct OPA to create a training, but if the board decides, hey, we want a training on this, and the board brings someone in, your language suggests the language proposed suggests that's okay. It also suggests that the board liaison could do the same and bring training in, whether or not the board requested that training or voted to have that training. That's all the language does. It wouldn't preclude the board from deciding to have some training that staff may not have seen as necessary.
Yeah, if I may, that's the way I interpreted the or, and I guess I would support those changes, including the or as modified to include the or, and I think in part I'm doing that because I'm assuming the good faith and the competence of everybody involved that we're not going to have. I understand sometimes it's good to think about worst case scenarios, but in the end, I would expect that OPA or any successor or any future board for that matter wouldn't propose frivolous trainings or things that wouldn't be beneficial. And in the unlikely event that they did, you always have two options. Number one, you can go attend a 1 hour training or whatever that you don't find beneficial, and then just stick it in your back pocket and give it all the value that you would deem it to have. Or you can update the bylaw again if we get to the point where there really is a problem with like a rogue either board or office.
The reason why I wanted this bylaw is because it was a problem with different leadership. So I think that is why I am so adamant about my concern. I trust, through the relationship that I have had with OPA since my time on this board, and they have come on, I trust OPA. But I also know that budgets are budgets. that we have no idea if that budget is going to be allotted for OPA forever. This board doesn't have a budget, so this board, if OPA is eliminated, would still function. And there would be another liaison. And depending on what that liaison is and does and believes, I want to make sure that we can protect the integrity of trainings and therefore decisions of what this board can do. And I know that that's the intent of the language that you have as well, absolutely. But my concern is, with the current leadership, no problem with it whatsoever. No problem. Absolutely trust it. But government changes. People on this board will change. People in OPA will change at some point, which will break my heart, Brandon. But at some point, they will change. And I want to make sure that we plan for that inevitability.
And I think you have, Russell. I think by empowering the board to be able to make determinations around training, even if something were proposed that the board was concerned about, had additional questions about, the board, based on the language that you wrote, has the opportunity to say, no, we want more training on this. We want a second opinion on this. And you've empowered the board through a majority vote to be able to do that. And it's a simple majority. So I think you've done a good job of protecting from where your concern is coming from.
I appreciate that.
I would just join in those comments too, and I would say I think the amendment with the or meets those concerns, and I do appreciate the experience of members who've served longer than I have, who may be able to, anticipate problems that maybe I don't see yet. But I think with the language you drafted as amended, I think we satisfy those concerns.
I have just some final thoughts here, unless jump in for me, but I think that OR is doing a fair amount of heavy lifting here, but hearing the comments and thinking about it further, while I'm concerned about a conflict arising between the push and pull of what the board wants versus what the liaison or equivalent wants, I think that this still accomplishes what we're trying to do. I think I'm in favor of the proposed amended language for the first sentence and striking the second language.
So Jason, just to be clear, you're suggesting to strike the entire second sentence?
Yeah, I think with the change to the first sentence, I don't think the second sentence does anything anymore, right?
May I read it again?
Go ahead.
Okay. New and existing members shall receive additional training as deemed necessary by a majority vote of the board or as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent. Recommendations pertaining to additional or remedial training shall be made in collaboration with the board liaison or functional equivalent. I think at that point, decisions works.
Yeah.
I think either one. Are you saying recommendations or did you
The
say?
way you read it at that point makes sense
Okay.
to me. But
One more time for the folks at home? Okay. New and existing members shall receive additional training as deemed necessary by a majority vote of the board or as determined by the board liaison or functional equivalent. Recommendations pertaining to additional or remedial training shall be made in collaboration with the board liaison or functional equivalent.
And so your proposal is to keep that second sentence?
with
I'm good either way. I like the word collaboration.
Okay.
I think you put it in for a reason.
It's a good word.
And I think it was important. So I don't think it takes anything away. I think it just hones in on the fact that we intend this to be a partnership.
All right. Any further discussion on this?
while I don't think I'll vote in favor of it, I do think that that is clear and accurate language. So,
Russell, I'm not sure we've ever voted the same.
Yeah.
Maybe once or twice.
Okay. With no additional discussion at this time, do I hear a motion?
I guess I'm just trying to think how to formulate the motion. I mean, I'd like to move to approve that bylaw amendment with the edits that were just read aloud. Is that, I mean? That's appropriate. That's appropriate way to make the, okay. In that case, I would move that we approve the amendment to bylaw 2.10 with the amendments to the second paragraph that Ms. Williams just read aloud.
Real quick point of order before I go for a second. We've now proposed a change to the amendment that was published. There's no issue with having to republish this or anything. We've fulfilled the obligation by putting the original draft up there, even though we've changed it now. Okay. All right. That said, do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Okay. Hearing none, we'll take it to a vote. Do we want to do a roll call vote for this? I don't know if it's appropriate to do a verbal one for this one.
All right. Jason Osborne.
I vote yes.
Yes. Russell Olmsted.
I vote no.
Dean Pacific.
Yes.
Jordan Cross.
Yes.
And Michelle Williams.
Yes.
Okay. Democracy in action. The motion passes. I think this goes a long way to filling a gap. While it may not be perfect, I think it's certainly a step in the right direction, and I appreciate the lively discussion, all the efforts, and let me thank the subcommittee for all their hard work on this too, and having patience with me as far as scheduling goes, and the board as well. I know this has been out there for a long time. I'm glad we're able to reach resolution on this, and certainly open to revisit it in the future as so desired. Okay, moving on. Next order of business is old business. Do we have any?
We do not.
Okay. Nothing from the board? All right. Next item of business is open discussion. Everybody doing okay?
I actually I'm just, for the next meeting, if we could get, would it be possible to please get a update from, if there has been one, regarding, I know that the board chair sent a letter to the, I believe it was the city manager, regarding concerns that the subcommittee had found about other term limits, or not term limits, but the term of board members, and offering recommendations about how we could, how we believe it could be addressed, but it's beyond the purview and the power of the board to address it, and that we need city movement on that to try to rectify some of that. And so I was hoping that we might be able to get some sort of update regarding that to follow up and see if there will be any sort of action moving forward on that.
Fair to say we haven't received any update since our last discussion about this?
I don't recall an update, but I want to be fair and say I don't recall asking about it again either, which would be the next course of action related to it. I would need to I think we may have talked about it a little, but we will circle back at the next meeting.
Let's do this. Let's put an item on next month's agenda for old business to revisit this issue.
Sure.
And other than that, I just want to second what the chair said about, man, I appreciate deliberation and discussion, and love this body as a deliberative body and the people that I serve with on it. So I appreciate that very, very much. So thank you for all of the points and the hard work that everybody was doing and discussing and making sure that all of us have the right intentions moving forward on any sort of bylaw changes and the integrity of this board and what this board does. There have been times where I've served on this where people don't have that type of commitment and understanding and belief in it, regardless of whether we agree or not on the final wording. So I truly appreciate the amount of integrity and intent and that is brought to this board, and why everybody, including our partners from the city. So thank you.
I guess I just had a question. Let's say we're kind of like already determined, like we want to do a training on some particular topic, and like we're aligned on that. How do we determine like who facilitates the training? Does that make sense? So like even if we wanted to have, we all were aligned that we wanted to have a mental health training, who gets to then determine like who facilitates that training? Like is it the local, you know what I mean? Or if it's a different topic, like you had mentioned, like a local city member might want to do a training on equity or something like that. Who gets to decide, like, is it going to be this person or this organization? Who kind of decides the philosophy, or does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was just kind of wondering about that because I'm not.
Let me jump in and say, this board holds an unusual amount of power, I think, for a volunteer citizen-based board, but I don't think this board has the subpoena power to compel people to come in and do anything.
And don't forget the zero budget.
That's a zero budget, right? So we're dependent upon people willing and able to provide that training at their discretion, right? So I think it's a matter more of training being available through some means, and again, at no cost, as a community service. And if that's made available, then the board vote. I mean, we can vote on having any training we want, but if there's no one to deliver that training, it's kind of meaningless, my impression. But feel free to jump in and correct me where I might be deficient.
I think that's true. So I do have a budget, right? So it depends on what it is. If trainings are being brought forth and the training that is being raised seems meaningful, it's within OPA's budget and my spending authority, right? We would be the ones to contract with an individual, and we would follow the city's purchasing policies in order to do that. There are requirements for how we navigate those types of spaces. But if it's a free training and the board's like, hey, we want to get training from this person on this topic, I think the board could do that as well.
Sorry, not to keep going, but is there anybody that kind of like safeguards those trainings so that we are being like trained well? Like who, do you know what I mean? Like who kind of determines like who's a qualified trainer then, even if it's free?
Yeah, so based on the bylaw that you all just passed, the board would determine that the board wants certain types of training, and if it's specific, we want X training from X place. Based on what you just passed, I think the board can say that. And again, if it's within your spending authority, which is zero, right, then the board can make that happen, assuming that someone is willing to do it. If it is a city paid for training, we vet, trainers. We consider their qualifications, their experience, their background, whether the training will be meaningful. We go through purchasing processes to make those type of decisions on all the trainings we offer throughout the city when we contract with individuals. So we would follow similar processes.
Any further open discussion on any topic? All right, hearing none, moving on to public comment. We have a couple people in the audience today, but if anyone has wishes to come forward with a comment, please do so at this time. Seeing none, I think that brings us to adjournment. If there's nothing further, we will sit in adjournment until next month.
Hey, thank you.